The spreadsheet was not my idea. Tick opened it. She was trying to explain to me, in November 2022, why she needed to send another 40,000 baht to her family in Surin, and she was doing this by listing the previous transfers on her phone to show me the context, and as she listed them I said, "Can you send me that list?" Before I give you what the list produced, I want to give you the November transfer request in the specific way it arrived, because the way it arrived was the same way every transfer request had arrived across 7 years, and the consistency of the delivery is part of the story. Tick came to me on a Wednesday evening while I was reading, sat down at the kitchen table with her phone, and said she needed to discuss the family situation. This is the phrase she uses, the family situation, and across 7 years I have learned that the phrase means a transfer is being discussed. She described the situation with the specific detail she always provides. Her brother Chai had been out of construction work for 6 weeks, due to a disruption in the project he was working on, and the household in Surin was short this month, and her parents were covering some of the gap, but her mother's medical appointment in December was going to put pressure on the parents' budget, and Mali's children's school fees were due in January, and Tick thought we should send 40,000 to address the immediate needs and leave some buffer. I listened. I asked whether Chai had new work lined up. She said yes, starting in 2 weeks. I asked whether the 40,000 would cover the December and January requirements. She said probably, and she could add from her own business if needed. I said I would transfer it in the morning. She said thank you, and went back to the kitchen. This exchange lasted approximately 12 minutes. It was the same 12 minutes that had produced every previous transfer across 7 years. And it would have produced this one the same way if I had not said, "Can you send me that list?" The spreadsheet was not my idea. Tick opened it. She said yes and sent it over. I opened it on my laptop and I put it into a proper spreadsheet, and I started adding up the columns, and the number at the bottom was not the number I had been carrying in my head, because the number I had been carrying in my head was a rough estimate that I had never formalized, and that was wrong by a factor of approximately 1.6. The number at the bottom of the spreadsheet was 418,000 baht across 7 years. I sat with this number for a day. Then I had a conversation with my wife that we should have had in year 1, and I am going to tell you what the number looked like and what the conversation produced, because both are instructive. My name is Bernard. I am 67 years old. I am from Auckland, and I spent 33 years as an accountant and audit partner in a firm that specialized in SME clients across Auckland and the Waikato. I retired in 2016, and I came to Thailand in 2017, and I married Tick in 2019. I want to give you why Udon Thani specifically, because the choice is not obvious, and the why matters for the account. I came to Thailand rather than another Southeast Asian country, because an Auckland accountant I knew, who had retired to Chiang Mai, described it with the specific enthusiasm of a man who has found the correct next thing, and the enthusiasm was credible because it came from a credible person. I came to Udon Thani rather than Chiang Mai because the Udon Thani property market in 2017 offered significantly better value per square meter than the Chiang Mai market for the type of property I wanted, a house rather than a condo, with a garden, within 10 minutes of a hospital, and because an accountant who has spent 33 years analyzing value recognizes when a market is correctly priced and when it is not, and Udon Thani was correctly priced and Chiang Mai was not, in the specific residential category I was purchasing. The house I bought cost approximately 4 million baht and has appreciated to approximately 6 million baht in the 7 years since, which is a return on investment that the Chiang Mai alternative would not have matched, and which the Udon Thani choice produced because I did the analysis before committing rather than after. I can do the property analysis. I should have applied the same analytical rigor to the family support structure that has been running alongside the property investment for the same 7 years. The property is on a spreadsheet. The family support should have been on a spreadsheet from the start. My name is Bernard, and I want to give you the first thing I need to tell you, which is that Tick is the correct person for me to be married to, and that this recording is not a recording about a man whose marriage went wrong. It is a recording about a man whose marriage contained a financial structure that he understood imprecisely for 7 years, and that he understood precisely as of November 2022, and the precision has produced a marriage that is better managed than it was before. And the better managed marriage is the thing that emerged from the spreadsheet, and the spreadsheet is what Tick accidentally opened. Let me give you the accountant background, because the accountant background is the specific irony of this story, and the irony deserves to be named. I want to give the accountant background more specifically, because the 33 years are not just the irony's source. They are the reason I eventually did what I did, and the doing of it was the correct action even though it arrived 7 years late. An audit partner who works in SME accounting for 33 years develops a specific relationship with financial clarity. You seek it, you value it, you trust it, above sentiment, and above approximation, and above the comfortable feeling that things are probably fine. The uncomfortable truth that the audit function produces is always better than the comfortable approximation, because the comfortable approximation does not reveal the exposure until the exposure has become a crisis, and the crisis is more expensive to manage than the clarity would have been. I taught this to every junior staff member who worked through my firm. I believe it as a professional principle and as a personal value. The specific failure in Udon Thani was not that I violated the principle, but that I failed to apply it to a domain I had categorized as personal rather than financial, and the categorization was wrong because the domain was both. A marriage is a financial structure and a personal one simultaneously, and the financial analysis that a professional would apply to the financial dimension of any other arrangement should also apply to the financial dimension of a marriage, and I applied it late and I am applying it now. Let me give you the accountant background, because the accountant background is the specific irony of this story, and the irony deserves to be named. I spent 33 years managing other people's financial structures with the precision that the audit function requires. Every liability on the balance sheet, every cost properly allocated, every exposure identified and either managed or disclosed. I reviewed hundreds of client businesses in which the owner did not know their numbers, and I found this to be the most reliable predictor of business difficulty. Not a bad market, not a difficult product, but the owner who had not looked at the numbers carefully because the looking was uncomfortable or because the business was running and looking seemed unnecessary. I gave the same advice to every such client. Look at the numbers now. It is easier to see clearly when things are going well than to look clearly when they are going badly. I want to add what I mean by personal rather than financial, because the category distinction is the core of the error. When I say I classified the family support as personal, I mean I applied to it the logic that I apply to other personal expenditure. I make a decision, I make a payment, the decision is made, and the payment is made, and the decision does not need to be reviewed because it was correct at the time it was made. This is appropriate logic for decisions that are genuinely one-time or that are contained within a clearly bounded budget that I am tracking. It is not appropriate logic for a recurring commitment that grows over time and that has no defined ceiling and that is managed by a second party on my behalf. The family support was a recurring commitment with no defined ceiling managed by Tick on our behalf. It should have been subject to the logic I apply to financial commitments: periodic review, aggregate tracking, trajectory analysis, forward planning. I applied the personal logic instead of the financial logic, and the personal logic produced 7 years of managed confusion. The financial logic would have produced a clear picture from year 1. The financial logic is not less kind than the personal logic. The financial logic in this context would have produced the November conversation in year 1 rather than year 8, and the November conversation produced a better marriage. The kinder thing would have been the financial logic applied earlier. I gave this advice for 33 years. I did not apply it to my own household finances in Thailand for 7. This is the irony. It is not a subtle irony. I want to give you the specific type of client who didn't know his numbers, because recognizing the type is the lesson. The type is not a foolish person. The type is often an intelligent person with considerable professional expertise, who has classified a domain as personal rather than financial, and who has therefore exempted it from the analysis they would automatically apply to any other financial domain. The business owner who doesn't know his own margins is often a person who knows exactly what margins should look like in someone else's business. The husband who doesn't know his own household's family support total is often a person who knows exactly what comprehensive financial monitoring looks like in someone else's context. The classification is the error, and the classification is produced by the emotional importance of the domain. I did not analyze the family support structure because the family support structure was part of my relationship with Tick, and analyzing my relationship with Tick analytically felt to me like treating it as a business arrangement, which felt wrong. The feeling was wrong. The relationship with Tick is a partnership, and a partnership should be managed with the same financial clarity that any partnership requires. And the clarity is not the opposite of warmth. It is the foundation for a sustainable version of the warmth. I know this. I taught it to clients for 33 years. I applied it to my own marriage in year 8. I gave this advice for 33 years. I did not apply it to my own household finances in Thailand for 7. I should tell you about Tick and about her family, because the family structure is the context for the drain, and the drain cannot be understood without the structure. Before I give you the family, I want to give you Tick properly, because the recording should not present her primarily as the conduit for a financial flow. Tick is 43, from Surin originally. She has been running her clothing business since 2011, and the business is the product of 12 years of her own effort and capital. She started with a market stall, grew it to a small shop, expanded the stock range when she identified the demand for it, and now supplies approximately 30 regular customers in the Udon Thani area with imported Thai textile goods. She negotiates her own supply contracts with 3 suppliers in Bangkok and 1 in Chiang Mai. She manages the accounts, the stock, the deliveries, and the customer relationships. The business turns over approximately 350,000 baht annually, and the margin is approximately 40%, which means her net income from the business is approximately 140,000 baht per year, which is approximately 1/3 of my pension income. She is not financially dependent on me. She is financially independent in the sense that she could run her life on her own income if the marriage ended. She has chosen to be married to me, and the marriage is the result of a choice made by a person with options, and the choice is genuine, and I want this established before the financial account is given, because the financial account should be read against this background. I should tell you about Tick and about her family, because the family structure is the context for the drain, and the drain cannot be understood without the structure. Tick is 43, from Surin originally, and she came to Udon Thani in 2005 to work in the textile import business of a woman she knew through her mother's network, and she has been in Udon Thani since, building a life that is entirely her own creation rather than the continuation of anything she inherited. She is an industrious person. She runs a small clothing business that she established in 2011 and that turns over approximately 350,000 baht per year, which is modest but real, and she manages the stock and the suppliers and the sales and the customer relationships herself without assistance. And she is a good-natured person, which is the quality I want to name first, because it is the quality that is most relevant to the financial situation. The generosity she directed toward her family in Surin was the same generosity she directed toward me, in a different register, and the two things are connected in a way that took me 7 years to understand. The family in Surin, her parents, who are 68 and 71, in a house that the family owns and that requires, as houses in provincial Thailand require, periodic maintenance and occasional significant investment. Her younger brother Chai, who is 39, who has a wife and 2 children, and works in construction work that is seasonal and that produces, in the off-season, a household income that does not meet the household's requirements. I have met Chai 4 times across the marriage, and I find him an amiable person who is doing his best in an economic environment that does not fully reward the effort he puts in. The construction industry in Isan is seasonal and competitive, and a man without formal qualifications and with family obligations is in a difficult position in it. The motorbike is the difference between employment and unemployment in this context, and the repair costs are real and recurring and not available to Chai from his own income in the off-season. This is not a sympathy plea. It is a description of an economic reality that the transfers address, and the addressing of it is both morally appropriate and financially manageable, and the managing of it should be done with clear visibility of the aggregate, and not through sequential individual responses to sequential individual needs. Both things are true simultaneously. Her elder sister Malie, who is 46, who was widowed in 2018 when her husband died of a sudden illness, and who has been managing on her own since, with 2 teenage children, and the income from a small market stall that does not fully cover the children's school costs. These are the 3 dependency nodes in the family structure, and they each have needs that arise with an irregularity that prevents them from being budgeted for in advance, and that produce, at intervals of approximately 6 to 10 weeks, a request that arrives through tick to me. I want to give you the 7 years of requests in the form they arrived, because the form matters. They did not arrive as a systematic program. They arrived as emergencies and necessities and opportunities, each individually described and each individually justified. The parents' roof in 2017. Chai's motorbike, which broke down in 2017, and without which he could not get to work, and then again in 2019 with the same problem on a different bike. The school fees for Malie's children, which arrived each semester with the specific urgency of a fee that cannot be deferred without the children losing their place. The parents' medical costs, which began as occasional and became quarterly as the parents aged, and their health became more demanding. A flood in 2021 that damaged the parents' house and required significant repair. The funeral costs for a cousin in 2020 that Tick felt obliged to contribute to because the cousin's family had been generous at her own father's celebration in 2018. A sewing machine for Malie's market stall in 2022 because the previous one had failed and the stall's income depended on it. These are the items I remember. They are not the complete list. I want to give you a Surin visit, because I have been to Surin 3 times across the marriage, and the visits are part of the context for understanding the transfers. Surin is approximately 5 hours south of Udon Thani by road, and I drive rather than fly, because the drive is interesting, and because arriving by car at a rural family compound is a more useful arrival than arriving by taxi, which produces a different register of interaction. Tick's parents' house is a single-story structure on the edge of the village, with a garden that her mother has managed since before Tick was born, and that has the specific character of a garden that has been tended by the same person for 40 years. Particular plants in particular places, a productive vegetable section, fruit trees that are old enough to have been young when Tick was young. The parents are hospitable in the specific way of rural Thai parents whose daughter has married a foreign man and who have decided to receive this information with dignity rather than with difficulty, which I appreciate and which I have responded to by making the effort to be a useful presence when I am there, rather than a spectator. On the most recent visit, I repaired a fence section that had been damaged by the flood and that had not been attended to, which required tools I had brought from Udon Thani and approximately 4 hours of work, and Tick's father assisted, and the 4 hours produced the specific quality of shared work between 2 men who have no common language, but who both know how to fix a fence. I find these visits valuable in a way that the transfers themselves do not produce, because the visits make the family real, and the reality of the family makes the transfers meaningful rather than merely financial. These are the items I remember. They are not the complete list. Each transfer was individually described and individually justified. The spreadsheet that Tick sent me was her running record of the transfers. She had been keeping the list in her phone's notes application since approximately 2018, not as a budget tool but as a memory aid for discussions with the family about what had already been provided and what was still outstanding. The list was in Thai, which I do not read, and she had been translating each item as she sent money, which meant that my understanding of the transfers had been derived from the individual translations rather than from the aggregate. This is the specific information asymmetry that the spreadsheet resolved. Tick knew the total because she had the list. I did not know the total because I had only the individual items. The individual items had each been assessed and agreed in the moment. The aggregate had never been assessed. I put the list into a spreadsheet in the way that an audit partner puts information into a spreadsheet, which is with category headings and date sorting, and a total row and a chart. The total row said 418,000 baht. The chart showed a clear upward trend from the first full year of marriage onward. The annual total had been approximately 30,000 baht in 2019, 45,000 in 2020, 58,000 in 2021, 72,000 in 2022 before the November item. The upward trend was steep enough that a linear projection for 2023 produced approximately 88,000 baht, and a continuation of the trend to 2025 would produce approximately 120,000 baht, which is approximately 3,000 New Zealand dollars per year at current rates, which is a sum that my New Zealand pension and the savings I had brought to Thailand could sustain for longer than I was likely to live, but which was significantly more than I had understood myself to be committing to annually when I agreed to each individual transfer. The day I sat with the number, I thought about what I would tell a client who had come to me with this situation. I would tell them, this is a liability that is not on your books, and that is growing. You need to decide whether the liability is one you are willing to carry at its projected scale, and if not, you need to have a conversation about the scale with the person who manages the liability on your behalf. The conversation needs to happen before the scale becomes unmanageable, not after. I had been the client who had not looked at the numbers, and the client was now looking at the numbers, and the conversation was overdue. The conversation with Tick happened on a Sunday morning. I want to describe it accurately because it is the most important conversation in this recording, and it needs to be presented fairly to both parties. I said, I went through the list you sent me, and I put the numbers together. She said, and? I said, the total is 418,000 baht, and the amount has been increasing every year, and I want to understand what we should expect going forward. She was quiet for a moment. She said, do you know how much I have sent from my own business? I said I did not. She opened her phone and showed me her own records. The total from her own business income was 230,000 baht across the same period, which I had not known about and which changed the picture significantly. The family had received approximately 650,000 baht from our household in 7 years, of which 65% had come from me and 35% had come from Tick. This was not the picture of a woman who was routing family transfers through a compliant husband. This was the picture of a woman who was managing her family's needs with every resource available to her, including her own income, and who had been doing so in the way that Thai daughters manage such things, which is quietly and without the kind of explicit accounting that would have been uncomfortable to present. I sat with the new picture for the rest of Sunday. The picture was different from the one I had been carrying, and the difference was important. I had been carrying a picture of a unidirectional flow from me to the family, and the actual picture was a bidirectional flow from both of us to the family, with my contribution larger but hers substantial. The picture change produced something I was not expecting, which I am going to describe as recognition. Tick had been managing the family with every resource she had, including her own business income, and she had been doing it without the explicit conversation, because the explicit conversation might have produced exactly the scrutiny it eventually produced, and she had preferred to manage the situation rather than present it in full. I had preferred not to examine the aggregate. We had both chosen not to look, in different ways, and the November list was the accidental opening of the account book that neither of us had formally opened. The total was higher than I had realized. The balance was more equitable than I had assumed. What I had not known was not the number but the partnership. We had been managing the family together without ever discussing that we were doing it together. which is the specific failure I want to account for in this recording. Not that the transfers happened, but that they happened without the shared accounting that a married couple should apply to a shared financial commitment. The conversation produced the following: a joint ledger that we now maintain in a shared spreadsheet. I want to describe the conversation itself more precisely, because the description of it in the recording so far, a Sunday morning conversation, does not convey what it was like. It lasted approximately 90 minutes, and it moved through 3 phases. The first phase was the numbers. I showed Tick the spreadsheet I had built from her list, with the category analysis and the trajectory chart, and I asked her if the numbers looked accurate to her. She checked a few of the entries and confirmed they were. She also, in this phase, showed me her own records, which produced the picture I described. The numbers phase was the most straightforward. 2 people looking at the same data, verifying its accuracy. The second phase was harder. I asked Tick what her expectation was for the family support going forward, and she was quiet for a moment, and then said she had not thought about it in those terms. She had thought about each situation as it arose, not about the aggregate or the trajectory. This was the honest answer, and I want to be clear that it was honest. Tick is a person who manages things situationally, and who does not find the aggregate analysis natural. I am a person who finds aggregate analysis natural, and who had chosen, for 7 years, not to apply it. The third phase was the arrangement. We discussed what a reasonable ongoing commitment looked like, and we agreed on the framework that is now in the shared spreadsheet. This phase was the most generative, because it produced something neither of us had had before, which was a shared understanding of what we were doing and why. The generativity of that phase was the thing I had been missing for 7 years. The conversation produced the following: a joint ledger that we now maintain in a shared spreadsheet, with both our contributions logged, that we review together quarterly. A discussion about the individual family situations and what reasonable ongoing support looks like for each. The parents, whose medical costs are real and growing, receive a fixed monthly amount that we have set and that we review annually. Chai has been provided with a better quality motorbike that we funded jointly as a capital item rather than a recurring repair cost, and his seasonal income gap is now addressed through a smaller monthly contribution that is sized to the gap. Mali's sewing machine was the last single-item gift, and her stall now receives a quarterly contribution that Tick manages. The total annual family support since the November conversation has averaged approximately 68,000 baht, which is lower than the 2022 run rate and which we have both agreed is the appropriate level. The transfers are visible to both of us. The decisions are made together. The picture is accurate. I want to tell you what the 7 years cost and what they produced, because both numbers are part of the honest account. Before the cost and the product, I want to give you the practical advice, which is what this recording exists to provide, alongside the account. The advice is straightforward, and it has 2 components. The first, set up the shared visibility at the beginning of the marriage, rather than 7 years in. The conversation about family support, how much, for whom, on what schedule, with what expectations about the future, is a conversation that is easier to have in year 1 of a marriage than in year 7. Not because the content is easier, but because in year 1, the conversation is clearly about establishing a structure rather than about the adequacy of what has been done. In year 7, the conversation about the aggregate is also a conversation about the previous 7 years, and the previous 7 years are harder to discuss than the future would have been. Have the conversation in year 1. It will be uncomfortable. It will be considerably less uncomfortable than the year 7 version. What does the year 1 conversation look like? It looks like this. You sit down with your partner. You describe the family situation as you currently understand it. Who has needs? What those needs are? What the approximate annual cost of addressing them is. And you ask her whether your understanding is accurate, and what she expects going forward. You establish a monthly or quarterly amount that represents the household's planned contribution to the family. You agree on how decisions about one-time or emergency transfers will be made. You set up a simple tracking document, a shared spreadsheet, a shared notes file, whatever format works, that both of you can add to when a transfer is made, and you review it together every quarter. That is the Year 1 conversation. It is a 40-minute conversation with a setup cost of building a shared document. It replaces 7 years of accumulated imprecision with a clear picture from the start. Have the conversation in Year 1. It will be uncomfortable. It will be considerably less uncomfortable than the Year 7 version. I can confirm both. The second, look at the aggregate quarterly rather than item by item at each individual request. The audit partner's insight, that the aggregate is where the picture is, not the individual item, applies directly to this situation. Each individual request for family support is almost always legitimate in isolation. The aggregate may or may not be sustainable at the trajectory it is on. You will not know the trajectory if you are only looking at the individual items. Maintain a running total. Review it together quarterly. The running total is not an audit of your wife's family relationships. It is an accounting of a shared financial commitment that two married people should manage together. And the shared management is the thing that produces the marriage I now have instead of the marriage I had for the first 7 years. I want to tell you what the 7 years cost and what they produced, because both numbers are part of the honest account. The 7 years cost me 418,000 baht that I had not budgeted for and that I had not counted. They also produced a marriage that I had failed to fully enter, in the financial dimension, because I had been managing my contribution as a series of individual decisions rather than as a joint commitment with a partner who was also making her own contribution. The November conversation was the entry into the marriage that should have happened in 2019, and the entry cost one Sunday morning and a spreadsheet, and the spreadsheet was provided by my wife, and my wife provided it because she was explaining a transfer and not because she intended it to produce the audit that it produced, and the audit produced the marriage that the marriage should always have been. I want to add one more thing about the November conversation and what it produced in the weeks after, because the conversation was not an ending but a beginning. Tick asked me, approximately 2 weeks after the Sunday conversation, whether I was angry about the 7 years. I said I was not angry. She said, "You were surprised by the total." I said yes. She said, "I was also surprised when I saw it all together." This was the most important thing she said. She had not been managing a specific total. She had been managing individual situations, and the accumulation of the individual situations had produced a total that was larger than her own running estimate, and the November list had produced her own recalibration alongside mine. We were both, in November 2022, learning what we had been doing together, and the learning was available to both of us from the list that she had been keeping since 2018, and neither of us had looked at the list as a total until the Wednesday evening request and the question, "Can you send me that list?" Those 4 words, spoken because I was curious about the detail of a list that Tick was reading from her phone, are the 4 words that opened the account book that had been running for 7 years and that nobody had formally examined. 4 words on a Wednesday evening in November 2022. The 2 weeks after the Sunday conversation produced something I want to describe as a settling. We knew what we had been doing. We had discussed what we would do going forward. The arrangement was clear. The clarity was new and it was good, and it should have been available from the beginning, and it was not, and the not being available was the product of 2 people who had each chosen, in their own way, to manage the situation rather than to understand it, and the understanding arrived, and we are in the understanding now, and the spreadsheet is open, and the marriage is better for it. The next quarterly review is in March. I will open the spreadsheet. Tick will have added the items she has contributed. I will add the items I have contributed. We will look at the total together and compare it to the plan. The total will be close to the plan because we have set the plan correctly. The plan is set correctly because we looked at 7 years of data before setting it. The 7 years of data were in Tick's phone the whole time. The phone was in the kitchen. The kitchen was in our house. I was in our house for 7 years not looking at the phone. The spreadsheet is now open. This is the complete account of the 7 years and the Sunday morning and what the spreadsheet produced. And the spreadsheet produced the marriage that the marriage should have been from the beginning, and the beginning is now, and the beginning is good. I am in Udon Thani. The clothing business continues. The family in Surin receives its monthly contributions, and the contributions are visible in the shared spreadsheet. Let me give you Udon Thani, because the city is part of the account, and it has not been described. Udon Thani is a city of approximately 400,000 people in the northeast of Thailand, Isan region, and it has the specific character of a northeastern Thai city that has a significant U.S. military history from the Vietnam War era, a large expat community relative to its size because of that history's legacy, and a commercial center that serves the agricultural hinterland of the Korat Plateau. I came to Udon Thani specifically because Tik was here, not because I had selected it in the way that a man selects a retirement destination from a shortlist. I selected Tik, and Tik was in Udon Thani, and Udon Thani is where I am. I have been here since 2017, and I have found the city to be the kind of place that a man who was not looking for it finds acceptable, and that a man who was looking for it would not necessarily have found first. The expat community is large enough to have a social infrastructure, a golf club, a bowling league I have no interest in, a Tuesday morning coffee group I attend approximately twice a month, and small enough that everyone in it knows everyone else, which has the benefits and the limitations of a small-town social environment. The benefits include, you know who is reliable and who is not. The community has an institutional memory of what happens to men who make the mistakes it is possible to make in Udon Thani, and the coffee group contains several men who could have given me the advice I am now giving you if I had asked them 7 years ago and did not ask because the question felt too personal. The limitations include, you also know everyone else's business, and the business is sometimes your own. I want to say something about the coffee group, because the coffee group is where I eventually discussed the November spreadsheet, about 3 months after the conversation with Tik, and the discussion produced something I did not expect. I described the situation to the group, not the full accounting, but the essence. I had not known the aggregate of the family support we had been providing. I had found out by accident. The number was larger than I had assumed, but the picture was more complicated than the number alone suggested. A man named Jeffrey, who has been in Udon Thani for 11 years and who was previously in the banking industry in Melbourne, said, "It's always more complicated than the number." I said, "Yes." He said, "You should have been reviewing it annually." I said, "I know." He said, "We all know." He gestured at the table. Most of the men at the table had been through a version of the family support conversation at some point in their marriages. None of them had been reviewing the total annually. Several of them had found out what the total was by an equivalent accident to mine. The coffee group does not turn this into a policy discussion. It turns it into a shared recognition that the thing that happened to you has happened to others, and the recognition is the specific benefit of a community of people who have been in the same place for long enough to have made the same mistakes. The limitations include, you also know everyone else's business, and the business is sometimes your own. But the knowing is also useful. I am in Udon Thani. The clothing business continues. The family in Surin receives its monthly contributions, and the contributions are visible in the shared spreadsheet. I review the spreadsheet quarterly, as an audit partner reviews the accounts of a client he cares about, which means with full attention and without judgment, and with the specific interest of a person who wants the numbers to be good, and who knows that they are good only if they are accurate. Let me give you the current quarterly review as it actually happens, because the practical description is more useful than the abstract one. I open the shared Google Sheet, which Tik and I set up in December 2022, and which we have both been adding to since, and I review the previous 3 months of entries. The entries include contributions from me to the family, labeled by recipient and purpose, contributions from Tik's business to the family, same labeling, and any non-recurring items, medical bills, school fees, one-time repairs, that we had discussed and agreed on in advance. I calculate the quarterly total and compare it to the planned amount. I note any items that were not anticipated in the quarterly plan. I prepare a one-paragraph summary that I share with Tick, in English, which she reads and sometimes asks questions about, and sometimes does not, because the summary confirms what she already knows from her own experience of the transfers. The review takes approximately 30 minutes. The 30 minutes produce a shared understanding of where we are against the plan. The shared understanding is the thing the first 7 years did not have. The sharing of it takes 30 minutes 4 times a year, which is 2 hours per year, which is 2 hours per year less than the time I would have needed to manage the consequences of not having looked. The numbers are accurate. The marriage is good. The spreadsheet is open on both of our phones. I should have looked at it 7 years ago, and I did not, and I am looking at it now, and this is the available correction. The correction was available in 2019. I am applying it in 2023. The margin between when it was available and when I applied it cost approximately 400,000 baht and 7 years of imprecision in a marriage that deserved precision. And the precision is now available, and the marriage is better for it. And I am an audit partner who applies financial analysis to things that deserve financial analysis. And a marriage with a financial dimension deserves financial analysis, and the financial analysis is now in place, and the spreadsheet is open on both of our phones, and it shows green, and I review it quarterly, and this is the complete and honest account of the 7 years and the Sunday morning, and what came after.